So I found an absolutely massive hat at the op shop the other day. Massive. Like, it's giving Jebediah. It's giving Ezekiel. It's giving, I have to get it because it's so nice and it's so big, but I did not have a plan for what to do with it. Until I remembered the decade that taste forgot, the 1830s. Now when I say that this hat is ginormous, I do mean it's pretty dang big. It is about 50 centimeters across, and it cost the reasonable price of 5. Now it should perhaps be acknowledged that a non-insignificant part of me would love to be able to just wear this hat in my day-to-day life. But it is extremely large and loud. And I'm not entirely sure that it could fit through the door of the bus. And one of those special ingredients that can take a look from costume to clothing are accessories like hats. And with so much straw built into this bad boy, I think that we can achieve poke bonnet greatness. In order to decide on the design of my bonnet, I looked at some antique fashion plates and then had a look through the online collections at the Met Museum. I found some extant bonnets from the time period to get the general shape and aesthetic notes that I wanted to incorporate into my project. There are a lot to choose from, and I only looked at one museum. A ginormous 1830s bonnet. What a lofty goal. But an attainable one, I think. There's so much straw in this hat already. And one of the things that stuck out to me in the shop is that the crown is already roughly the right size and shape, I think, especially proportionate to my head. And it's in really good condition without holes or breakage or decay, as I can see. So I'm really excited about this. It is going to require surgery, and it's going to require me going through sort of my catalog of reference images, and most fun, it's going to require a rummage through my stash to see what sort of feathers or flowers or silk or ribbons or wire are needed to achieve greatness. Let's get to it. Alright, after some careful rummaging, we have some yellow and white shot silk taffeta. Oh, it's gorgeous. I found some millinery wire, not terribly exciting, but essential. I also found some ribbon. So there's a really lovely checkered pattern bit, same ribbon but in pink. It's really lovely. And, ooh, I like this one a lot. This might be the winner. What do you think, Eskel? So these are pretty good contenders. Fairly period-looking ribbons. This one has a wired edge, whereas the other two don't. But yeah, once I get it shaped and covered, we'll be able to play with some options. Of course, no visit to the stash is complete without also consulting the large plastic bag of silk and paper flowers. So with a few last looks at the hat as it was, I prepared to cut it down into the bonnet it was destined to be. No going back. Cutting it off to give myself about, I don't know, that much. So I've set aside the crown because I think I want to try to wet it and then sort of reblock it to be a bit taller and a little bit narrower, or perhaps tapered a little bit based on those reference images I've seen. But I need to treat the brim because from what I can see, it's almost as if I had a circular brim and then I set the crown off center. I don't have a way to do that. This is a large gaping hole. I might want to change this from a fully round shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut straight through it. And now I will be able to play with the proportions. I'll be able to taper this back edge down if I want, and I'll be able to change the shape of this brim so that it's not going to look like an op shop straw hat. It's going to look like a bonnet that was made in situ on a bonnet block that's appropriate for this era. I don't have a bonnet block that's appropriate for this era. So what I'm going to do is try to read the component pieces that I'm seeing in these extants, and I'm going to try and fake it, essentially. I wish I had the money for like proper millinery blocks, because I really love making and shaping hats. But originals are precious hard to come by, especially the further back you go. But these shapes are attainable, and I think that we're going to be able to produce something that's a pretty decent copy. So now, can't go back, we can only go forward. I came outside to try to find something on which I could block my bonnet, and got stopped in my tracks because it's an absolutely beautiful day. But just over here, look, I think that's the winner. Now this is by no means my first rodeo when it comes to reblocking an op shop straw hat. But you know, I'm really sort of building this aeroplane as I fly it today. Until I said so a moment ago, I didn't know for sure that I wanted a tapered crown, but looking at these reference images and saying it out loud meant I definitely did. But what to use as a block? I had no idea. So I stepped out on my deck and saw this flower pot, and it was perfect. There seems to be a little bit of parallax error in the camera here, and I don't think you can actually see that it's nice and tapered. It's got about the right dimensions that I want. That'll give me a narrower crown here at the top, a little bit wider here at the bottom, and be able to shape into the brim however I choose to shape that one. And it was conveniently vacant because I forgot completely about the coriander plant that I had meticulously repotted about a week and a half ago. And lastly, being ceramic, it's going to be able to withstand the heat and strain and damp that it will take to reblock this straw. I ran a sink full of very hot water and soaked the crown until I felt it was saturated enough to stretch over the ersatz block flower pot. Reshaping the crown just means stretching it over this new shape so it takes on the form of the flower pot itself. A little bit tapered, a little bit taller. When I felt I needed to, I soaked the crown again in hot water to get it to loosen up so that it would adapt to the better shape. Repeated this until I was satisfied, and then it was time to get it dried. At first, I used just a single piece of cotton tape to hold it. So I went to use more of those strips, and it just kept giving sort of bumps all the way down the crown and wasn't really capturing the taper. So went back into my scrap bin and came up with all these strips of scrap linen and produced the mummy crown of this bonnet. So I think now this is going to dry really nicely, and all that remains is to wait. We'll unwrap it when it's dry. To shape the brim. When we last left our hero, we had cut off the crown and then cut a slash through it, and it's from here that I'm going to be able to do all my fussing and adjusting and make a bunch of decisions about proportion and angle and just how much mailbox I want to wear on my head. I'll tell you right now, it's a non-zero amount. Now here, I'm going to overlap this slash at the back, and this is how I'm going to be able to sort of decide how much brim I want to have, and I'll tell you right now, I think it's a lot. No matter what, I am going to need to cut down this back edge, because as you can see, it's knocking into my neck and shoulders, and that's not on, especially not compared to extants. But it's very Bo Peep, isn't it? Yeah, it's got kind of that 1820s shape and sort of the precursor to the 1860s spring bonnet a little bit. Gosh, that's an aggressive angle, isn't it? Oh, that's radical. Yeah, I think I'm not going to change it very much. I like this full depth, and this gives me plenty of playing space. I've seen extants where there's decor or fashion plates where there's like a giant ribbon or a spray of flowers on the inside of the brim, which I think is going to look really cool. So that compared with, or combined, not compared, with our tall tapered crown, and maybe canting in a little bit to give that really nice flared shape. I think this is great. Okay. So, judging based on what I was just holding there, my personal hand span like this is about 6 inches, so that's about 6 inches of overlap, which I'm going to use a pencil here to mark. And the inside gives me about 3 inches of overlap. Got that nice angle. Oh man, this kind of looks like one of those garden hats where your like cheeky ponytail is meant to stick out. I feel like I'm ready to go play tennis or garden. Yeah, oh man, this is great. Okay, yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to want to cut these edges maybe with a little bit of seam allowance so that I can stitch over them. Cut them. I'm going to need to bind any edges that I cut. So when I go to cut this back edge so that it doesn't run into my body, I'm going to need to bind it in some sort of tape, even if I don't wire that bit. But I probably will do some millinery wire around the top edge so I can make sure that I get that flared shape that I really want. But yeah, this is coming together well.
What I believe I'm going to do now is use my pencil to connect these two marks where I played with the angle that I want this brim to have. Connect that on both sides. You can see my little pencil marks here and here. So draw a straight line there, draw a straight line there. But before I cut, I want to go and check again that my crown base that is eventually going to be reattached to the brim inner edge, that's the same measurement, because I really don't want to lose any of the width of this brim. I like that proportionately, but before I commit to it, I just need to check some measurements. Success! Both measured almost exactly 52.5 centimeters, or about 20.5 inches. So they matched up. That makes me feel really, really good that this is going to work proportionately and suit my personal anatomy. Stoked.
She's beauty, she's grace. She wears a mailbox to hide her face. It's bonnet time.
I gotta say, this is exactly what I was hoping for. All right, next steps. These off. I had these holding the back edge together so I could try it on without, stabbing myself in the back of the neck. What I need to do is I need to bind this whole inside edge with cotton tape, encasing the raw edges and also giving the crown something to attach to. Also gives me more strength and less likelihood that the straw is going to fray here on the back edge when I go to join these two pieces together to hold that shape. Then what I would like to do is I want to wire this trimmed edge, which is how I got that flared shape that tapers under the back of my neck. I want to wire this edge with millinery wire and then bind that in cotton tape as well. So this is going to be tedious, and you don't want to watch that. Instead, probably want to watch him.
I was able to call them by name when they entered the class and be like, you are Callum, you are Allie,
All right, now I let this dry completely. It took a little bit longer than I expected because I think this straw is just extremely thick, which is not a bad thing. And now it is time to unwrap this mummy. That's fine. Let's see. Not bad. Ah! Now we have the little hat crown, the bonnet crown. And this, once bound and attached to the finished brim, is going to make for a really swell shape. Oh, this is so exciting!
Alright, now it's time to bind the edge of the crown. So just like I did with the edges of the brim, binding this in cotton tape. That's going to give me something to join to when I go to sew these two bits together without pulling through or risking pulling through the straw. Yeah, I could cut this, I think, on an angle, which would give an even jauntier shape to this bonnet. And the way I'm going to bind this is just folding tape over the edge, holding it in place with clips so that I don't risk stabbing myself with pins. It's the little things. Alright, the lower edge of the crown has been bound. There's some slight bulging there on the sides, but I'm really not fussed about it. It'll be covered up by all the decor and stuff that goes on these. What I'm going to do now is bring these two edges together, hold them in place with a clip, and then stitched through them with some very strong thread. Trying to do this one-handed is not very elegant.
Okay, so I have an assembled brim, as you can see, sewn there, outside edge bound in tape, wired so that I can change the shape as I like when I get to the final decor. I have my finished crown, and because I already checked these measurements, I already know they're going to fit. But before I assemble them, I've got to go. Yes. And I think so.
So just for this step, I've thrown a couple pins in just to hold these two pieces together, and working from the inside in very strong thread, I'm just going to whip these two pieces of tape together.
Alright, in pretty short order, I now have my own 1830s straw bonnet form. I'm pretty happy with how this came out. My next step is going to be to go back through those extant images, go back through my stash, and decide exactly how I want to decorate it. See if I want to leave the straw exposed, or if I want to mull it and cover it in silk. Then what ribbons and flowers and the rest of the stuff is going to go onto this. It's so silly.
So I believe I've hit on a plan of action. Looking at those extants, it really does look, at least in terms of survivals, that the ones that get their straw left plain are the ones that have a fancy straw to begin with, and fancy straw this is not. So I am going to cover it in the silk taffeta I initially found in my stash, this really beautiful yellow and white shot silk that I got from Silk Baron. It's got a really lovely weight to it. I got it several years ago. But I found in my stash some scraps of this lovely corally pink taffeta. I'd used most of it, I think, to make a petticoat several years ago, but I have just enough to add some accents, which to me is perfect because it ties the yellow silk into this really lovely wired ribbon that I got from Timely Tresses, I think a year or so ago, when I was at the Corsets and Cravats conference. What follows is the extremely long and arduous process of mulling and covering the bonnet. This is tedious and requires me to cut pieces of cotton flannel to cover the tip, the crown, the brim, the inside and outside. So rather than recount to you how long and exhaustively I worked on this, I'm just going to show you some of the highlights. Trust me when I say that this is a necessary part of the process, but it is by no means a terribly fun part of the process. I strongly recommend that you find an audiobook or a podcast or something to frankly dissociate to while you sew what feels like the exact same stretch of bonnet over and over and over. However, once it's all done,
it's going to look amazing.
Whew. That took a lot longer than I thought it would. However, it's done. And I have a bonnet. And I'm really stoked with how it came out. It's not perfect by any stretch. There's some of the ribs of straw that are still showing through, and some of the silk that I didn't quite get as smooth as I might have liked, but who cares? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, so they say. And now for my favorite part, which is decorating. I love this in part because it seems like the 1830s followed under the category of historical headwear that is characterized by the principles of taking everything you can possibly fit on the bonnet, sticking it on, and then finding at least 3 more things. I have some options in terms of ribbons I've found, more stuff I've uncovered as I've been working on this for the past couple days, found some feathers, and I'm ready to bring this bonnet to life.
I consulted the Workwoman's Guide, published in 1838 and available for free public domain online, for guidance as to how to decorate and trim the bonnet. This is a really great resource that I strongly recommend, and per their guidance chose a ribbon that went with but was darker than the colors of the bonnet itself. I found some contrasting materials, draped them, played with them, fussed with them until I found an arrangement that I thought pleasing. This is exactly what I hoped for. One of the things I really love is the way that they use the inside of brims as decorative playing space. These poofs of ribbon and bows and tails and whatnot. It's so cool. So with the addition of some curled ostrich feathers and paper flowers, I felt pretty good. I love it. I cannot believe this came out so well. Considering its extremely humble origins, especially, I don't have anything to say about it other than I'm stoked. I love its shape and scale. I love that I got to use so many stash materials. I like its uber femme frivolity. I gotta confess, I think through doing this project I've developed a bit of a crush on the 1830s. So I'm gonna have to do more. That means a shift and stays and petticoats and a gown and really leaning into becoming the over-the-top Bo Peep that I was always meant to be. And with that, I have completed my 1830s bonnet. Now on to the next thing,